Hey, everybody, it's Laurie Guest here. And in January of 2020, I started to study the effects of service fatigue in the workplace. And I was interested in the cause, but more importantly, what can be done to keep it at bay. Now, little did I know there was a pandemic coming our way, and we would face 2 years of an adjusted work environment and challenges very specific to the crisis. For example, a decrease in human civility. I think one of the biggest causes of service fatigue. So by 2022, I had enough data and a six pack of helpful tools to combat service fatigue. And I was ready to share it with an audience. Now, as a speaker, it's important that we find the right group to try new things. And I got lucky when a trusted friend, Patrick Maurer, who's a training coordinator for employee development for the City of Tempe, invited me to present to the public sector employees of the city. So get this, over a 2-day time period, I presented my brand new program, Bust Out of Service Fatigue, multiple times, open to any city staff interested in attending. We had a great turnout and some really great stories came out of that experience. So today I've invited Patrick to join me for a quick chat about the topic and hopefully provide a little insight that can be helpful to all of you. Hey, Patrick, thanks for carving out a little time for me today. Well, I have a couple quick questions for you, and
Yeah.
I think it'll be helpful for the people listening to hear how your team or members of your team have used it. But my first question is, what led your team to conduct a citywide training that was focused on service fatigue?
We've been big fans of your guest encounters program, and we've used that as a part of our onboarding process with a lot of employees. But in 2021, everyone's, hey, it's post-pandemic, or what is this in 2022? And yet we were still seeing something with our employees. And so early in 2022, I just did a simple post in our internal, communication tool talking about like our EAP and some of the resources we had. And the individual responses I started to get from people, thank you, thank you, thank you. We were realizing that there was something else still there. Like
Mhm.
the news may have said the pandemic's over, and yet people were still feeling a lot of things, and a simple day off of work or something wasn't enough. And we started to explore this, and I saw some of your quick webinars you're doing just early on in the process, and it was such great content. We thought this is perfect for where we're at right now. We're so happy we did it.
Oh, I'm so glad. And don't you find sometimes, Patrick, that when we face a tsunami-like experience, we say it's over because it feels better to say it's behind us, we made it through it. But in reality, there's a lot of cleanup to do after the tsunami goes through. And at least with the audiences I've seen in the last year since I was with you, we're still cleaning up and we've got a ways to
Yeah.
go. Agreed?
Absolutely. Like it still is coming up in topics from, that we have either from people's previous work or if they've been with the city the whole time, whatever it may be, the effects of it are still lingering, and people are still trying to figure out how to sort of make sense of the new land that they stand on.
And I still hold on to the belief that we had a lot of the service fatigue issues way before the
Yeah.
pandemic. It's always been there because we call it work for a reason,
Yeah.
right? Work is work. And we can have fun at work or we can really have a passion and a joy for what we're doing, but it is still work. And I feel what the pandemic did is magnified everything.
Yeah.
So even though it was a year ago,
Yeah.
is there a core message that, again, if I was catching you off guard and you didn't know we were going to do this interview, I just called you up
Yeah.
and said, hey, what's your core takeaway a year later? What pops in your mind for that?
We still talk about the idea of the sponge. Like
Okay, good.
there was this thing of, early in the training, you talked about, Velcro and taking everything in and hanging on to it or deflecting. And I think a lot of us were in sort of those patterns. We were either
Mhm.
hanging on to everything and it was weighing us down, or we were like, oh, nothing's wrong. But then you shared that metaphor of the sponge, and it just became this such a powerful thing that, like, I still think about, when I'm doing the dishes at night, how am I wringing out some of that fatigue that I have? And the fact that it was such a simple object,
Yes.
it is one that we're revisiting over and over and over again. And it still comes up in conversation.
It'd be nice to be able to go, I got to go wring out the sponge. It becomes a universal phrase for, I need this. I need to do this so that I can wring out all the stress of the day and then come back being more fully present for my family and re energized for the next day back at work. I just think that'd be great if everybody could have that permission to wring it out.
I mean, honestly, like my wife and I, we've started to use that a bit. We both recognized the past few months stress was rising again and
Yeah.
fatigue was setting in. And so just communicating some of that. And, I'm starting to do an evening walk again, listening to a podcast I like. And it's been so helpful. So I can
Yeah.
show up again and be present in my relationship and then be present at the work, the next day.
hmm The interesting thing, and you and I talked about this a little bit recently, is that it is the follow through
Mhm.
and the doing that makes a difference. And I want to talk about that for a moment. I always use this with weight loss. Talking about it is one thing, doing is another. Let's go for pie, right? So it's like, what are your thoughts about that, about the follow through with people that might have been listening to us that day?
I think it is that challenge of, how much you take that extra beat. I mean, I thought within the training, you gave us a lot of great opportunities to reflect and to apply it, to like maybe get out a calendar. And then you left, I remember one of the stories you talked about the idea of having time versus making time.
Mm.
And I think it is that thing of that final piece of just making the time to do these things. And I recognize when my sponge is filling up right now, the common piece is often is I'm not making time. I was, sitting at the house, just sort of scrolling through my phone and not going on that walk. I was going, and then when I made the intention to go and to do that, I was able to do this for my life. And I imagine for them, and this is just me projecting, but I imagine it's just the other things that kind of stack up and get in the way. And hey, I just don't have time for that. I don't have time because of this
Mhm.
versus, hey, let's make time. Because I've found that when I've done that personally, it's been a game changer for me. It's been
Mhm.
awesome. And it's just a matter of making that commitment.
And what those two things have in common, I think, is ownership. I'm owning the fact that we need to get back to our walks. I'm owning the fact that I need to make time. I'm owning the fact that if I want to treat our citizens with the very best customer service that I can, I'm responsible for that in whatever tool I need.
Yeah. And I also love the variety that you just shared there, because that was one of the things I think stood out for me in the training was it wasn't like everyone go and meditate 10 minutes a day. It allowed us to access those things that brought us joy or those things that provided us rest and to reflect on that and to sort of get back. It sort of built that bridge to where we once were and to figure out how we use that bridge to move forward now to where we want to be in really accessible ways. And so for me, like, making time for some of these things became easier because they weren't so foreign to me. It was just these
Mhm.
things I perhaps had forgotten to do in the midst of the pandemic or coming out of it, or, all the stresses that we have in our day to day.
Yeah, exactly. Now, we did the program a total of 5 times in 2 days, and you sat through every single one of them. And I noticed that each group responded to something a little different each time. Did you notice that too? And as a professional trainer yourself, why do you think that happens? I'm intrigued by that.
I think it was a combo of maybe a few different elements. One is we have such a wide range of people that attended the training. We literally had some of our solid waste drivers there, with some of our auditors, with some of our arts specialists, with some of our people who work in HR, and it was always a slightly different mix of people who all had different experiences prior to the pandemic, during the pandemic, where they were now. And so I think that created perhaps some sources or some thoughts of where they were fatigued or why they were fatigued. I
Uh-huh.
also thought that a lot of it was your ability as a facilitator. When you were in there, you really tapped into moments. It was so interactive with us sharing some stories, and not like, oh, I was put on the spot or felt threatened by it,
Right.
but really there was this feeling of openness that developed. And as people shared stories, it opened up another avenue perhaps in that. And I thought that that's what made each session just a little bit different. The core was always still there, but the
hmm
minor little nuances were just
Yeah.
a lot of the people in the room and your ability to work with the variety of people that were in the room, with each person sort of leaving feeling like they got what they needed.
Yeah. And that's been fun to me over the last year to watch how one idea can be taken in different ways depending on all the circumstances of the people who are there. So I'm glad it was a good experience for you guys. Before I let you go, is there anything else you wanted to add about the experience of Bust Out with the city of Tempe?
I just loved how authentic it was. People, constantly in the weeks that followed just commented of like how real you were. This wasn't fluff.
Right.
It felt super approachable and accessible. And that was one of the things I think we really, really needed was like, again, that sort of bridge of seeing where we're at and taking us to where we can be. And it just made that really nice impact. And so I really recommend the program.
Well, I appreciate that. And you experienced it when, how do we say it? We were building the plane while we were flying it.
Yeah.
So it was fresh out of the box. So I just am so grateful to have you in my life and that you had the trust to have me bring it to your town first. So, hey, everybody, I'm excited to share the Bust Out of Service Fatigue Frontline Toolkit, bring it to your organization. It comes with an ebook, 8 videos, a quick assessment tool, and discussion questions for your team. Putting the effort into figuring out how to bust out is going to allow you to reharness the energy to serve your customers, your patients, and even your citizens. Thanks for being here, Patrick. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.